Assalamu alaikum, my name is Arfat and welcome to a brand new video. Today I will be discussing Christianity in a nutshell, like what is Christianity, what are the Christian theology, how do we get Christianity, the different strands and strata of Christianity today. So inshallah all this will be discussed today. Now who is this video aimed towards? People who have no idea or what the origin of Christianity is. I will speak about the history, I will speak about the theology, I will speak about the social history, and some archaeology, and all. Basically, this will be about Christianity 101. I'll try not to make this video long, and as always, my videos are not scripted and they're just me talking. So inshallah ta'ala we will begin. The word Christian was first used in the book of Acts told us, somewhere in Syria. That is when the first followers of Jesus were called Christian. Now the book of Acts was probably written according to tradition by, it's not probably, it's tradition really says, Christian tradition says that the companion of Paul named Luke, he authored the book of Acts, and he also authored the gospel according to Luke. That is the traditional Christian claim. And so around the year 40 or 45, the term Christians was used to refer to the people who follows Jesus. Now, the word Christ came from the Greek word Christos, and if you translate it to Hebrew, it means Mashiach. It is a Messiah in English, Messiah in Arabic. And so the Messiah, the Messiah is a Jewish term. It basically means the anointed one. And so Jesus Christ basically means Jesus the anointed one. In the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, pots and pans were anointed. Pagan ruler were anointed. David were anointed. Solomon were anointed. Saul were anointed. And so the anointed one can refer to objects. It can also refer to human beings and living things as well. And so the term Christ here is not something that is special to the Christian corpus, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The word Messiah is only referred to Isa ibn Maryam in the Quran. No other prophets were called the Messiah or were called the Anointed One in the Quran. But that is a different discussion as to why this could have been. Now, the New Testament, I'll briefly speak about the New Testament. The New Testament is made up of 27 different books, and the Old Testament is made up of 39 books. Okay? And we go by the Protestant canon. Christianity, there are three major Christian groups today, if you want to call it that. We have the Roman Catholic, which is the biggest one, about 1 billion, and then followed by the Eastern Orthodox, as well as Protestantism. Majority of the Roman Catholics celebrate like the saint's birthday and things like that. And so does the Greek the Eastern Orthodox Church, which include the Greek as well, actually. But I'll just use Eastern Orthodox, so just not to confuse anyone. But Protestants do not really celebrate the patristic birthday or martyrdom day and things like that. So why is there a split? Majority of the activities that's going on in the early church that we do have a lot of accounts on the first 300 and 400 years. A lot of the writings came from the Eastern Church. Okay, meaning include modern day Turkey. In the ancient world, it is called Asia Minor. The West were pretty much not involved in the conflicts up until the early 4th century. And even during the Council of Nicaea, the West were not involved. And so it is the Eastern theologian, which includes the city of Alexandria in modern-day Egypt. They were the one who were engaged in a lot of these debates and refutations and dialogues, and a lot of councils and synods were held in the Eastern churches and were attended by Eastern bishops. And so the Christian belief that we have today, which is the Trinitarian belief, all three Christian groups adopted this view. And so majority of the Christians in the world today are Trinitarian. Now, Trinitarian belief derived after the polemics of the 4th century, and it wasn't until later on during the Council of Constantinople I in 381 CE, whereby the Trinitarian view, the foundation Trinitarian view, was established as the like an official doctrine for the Roman Christian. But a lot of these churches in the East, as well as in Alexandria in Africa, they remain upon their own beliefs, pre-Trinitarian dogma in a sense, because we have churches that is in the 4th and 6th century, 4th to 6th century, until the advent of Islam. They were Monophysites, they were Nestorians, they were Unitarians, and so they do not believe in the Trinity. In fact, certain churches were still Sabellianism, and so even though the Trinitarian doctrine was made like the official, but people were still practicing their own doctrine in their own private community, in their own churches and things like that. And so the Romans never actually like force people, like physically force people. And this is a lot of misconception. No doubt there was some persecutions happening here and there. People were exiled many times. But when it comes to the laity, most of them reverted back to their own doctrine or what they believe about Jesus and God. And so the Trinity, a lot of people misunderstood the Trinity. Even Christians themselves misunderstood what the Trinity is. And they give examples that doesn't really define what the Trinity really is. It is very important to note that the Trinity is that there is one person or one essence sharing three different beings. There are three beings and one essence, and this is the Trinity. Okay, this is like the literal what the Trinity is. Literally, we have three beings sharing one essence, and so this is a Trinity. So basically, it means God is there's one essence in God, but manifested in three different beings. Okay, even the word manifested here is should be used lightly. Because once you introduce the word manifested, then it is not the Trinity. And so due to the lack of vocabulary that I have to describe the Trinity, and so I use the word manifested here loosely, but basically it is three being, one essence. That is the Trinity in a nutshell. And how do Christians give example to the Trinity? And this I'm going to present you some mistaken examples. For example, the mythical dog, Cerberus, whereby we have one body and three heads. Okay, to say that the one body represents one ousia, one essence, and then the three heads represent the three different beings. But this is a false analogy. because the three heads contain three different brains, and therefore it cannot be the Trinity, because the Trinity basically it needs to be three heads and one brain, and this one brain is all in the three heads, but there's not three brains in three heads, if you get what I mean. Like one brain controls all the three heads. The mythical dog Cerberus doesn't have one brain that controls all the three heads. And even if we use that analogy, that is not the Trinity. And so the Trinity is a very complex thing to say. Like Bartman say, if you think you understand the Trinity, then you don't understand the Trinity. No one understands the Trinity, because there's a lot of contradictions, even among Christian theologians, when they are describing what the Trinity really is, and they refute one another. So no one really understands what the Trinity really is. Even the church fathers earlier on, they were fighting over what is the Trinity. Second example is that we have three chariots, okay, and we have one person. So like the three chariots is the three beings, and the one person is actually the ousia, the essence. Again, this example is not the Trinity. Okay, what the Trinity should be is that we have three persons. This one person is in all three chariots at the same time. That would describe the Trinity. Okay, one person in all three chariots at the same time. That is the Trinity. Because if you say that there's three chariots and there's one person, where is that one person? Who's going to control the chariot? And so in order for the Trinity to work in this example, I mean, I don't believe this is a good example, but just to play along, this one person needs to be in three chariots at the same time. Then that would be the Trinity. Now, another example is that, the Trinity can be described in this way. We have the past, the present, and the future. Okay, and so every person has a past, has a present, and has a future, if they're still alive, because that is how time works. Like we have a past, we have a present, and we have a future. This is not the Trinity, because we know that the past can never come back, and the future is still yet for us to reach, and so we are living in the present. And so this is a false analogy, a false example. So if we were to use this example, meaning that the Son no longer exists, because the past no longer exists, and the future is yet to come. And so the Holy Spirit, is it the future? The Parakletos, is it the future? How do we know? And so this example doesn't actually work. Now, the early church fathers actually tried their best to describe, but they are not describing the Trinity. They're trying to describe the relationship between the Son and the Father. Like, for example, the example that one of the greatest church theologian and philosopher, Origen of Alexandria, he died in around 252. He wrote majority of his work in the early 3rd century. He was trying to give example between the ray of the sun and the sun itself. And so the ray comes from the sun. And so the sun is from the same essence of the Father, in a sense. But Origen noted this himself, that God is the only unoriginated, because if the sun doesn't exist, then the ray doesn't exist. Okay, even though the sun will not exist without its rays, but the rays is emanating from the sun The sun is the one that produces the ray, and the sun must produce the ray. But the sun will still exist without the ray if the sun dies. Because the sun dies, the physical sun is still there, but the rays will no longer be emanating. And so Origen understood this by saying that the ray is produced by the sun, meaning the ray of the sun is dependent, not independent, but dependent on the sun. And this is as close as they got, actually. I think this is a very good example. This example is unmatched even today. And if you read the writings of the church fathers, they are very, very smart people. Even though Origen have been, a lot of people do not like the writing of Origen, especially the later church fathers, because they declare him heretic. But he is a very smart person, and he believed that God is the only unoriginated, like the Father is the only unoriginated, and then the Son is subordinate to him, to the Father. So what other examples can have Christians use to describe the Trinity that is not actually the Trinity? The state of solid, liquid, and gas. This is another example. Like water have three states. We have liquid, then we have solid, and we have gas. And so this represents the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Spirit. This is three different beings. And then we have the one essence, and that is water. Water is the essence. And so this describes the Trinity. Again, this doesn't describe the Trinity. This is a very bad example. And the reason why this is a bad example, and that is because liquid doesn't have the same characteristics as solid. And solid doesn't have the same characteristics as gases. And so they're not equal, even though, and their form changes. Okay, meaning they become something else. They have manifested, water have manifested itself in something else. And so this is actually Sabialism, because if you take the same water, okay, in its liquid state, and you froze it, it is actually the same. Okay, it is the same thing. You froze it, but it is no longer a liquid state, meaning the liquid state doesn't exist anymore. And so if you were to apply this to the Trinity, it basically means that the Father doesn't exist anymore, okay, when he, quote unquote, come down to earth to become the Son, to reveal himself to a human being, meaning he doesn't exist anymore. Okay, and so this example is actually Sabialism, because we have the same thing, okay, whereas if you drink the water, or if you drink or if you eat if you eat ice, okay, meaning you are also affecting the same essence, the same water. And so this is actually Petropessimism, whereby if you eat the solid state of water, meaning you are also eating the liquid state of water. And so this is not a good example. If you were to relate this basically means that if the Son suffered, the Father also suffered on the cross. But the Trinitarian view states that no, the Father do not suffer, only the Son. And so this example is a very terrible example, because it is a heresy. And so this is not the Trinity. Now, I could go on and on and on and describe to you what the Trinity is not. And so how can we give examples through the Trinity so that one understands what the Trinity really is? The fact is, there is no example. The church fathers say there are things that have not yet existed that can come into existence. And there are also things that have not yet existed that cannot come into existence. And the Trinity, I believe, is the latter. Things that have not existed, that will never come into existence. In order for one to believe in the Trinity, you have to believe in a squared circle, which doesn't exist. It defies logic. And Isaiah says that God is not the author of confusion. Now, the other thing about the Trinity is that Christians have been trying to make Jesus equivalent to Yahweh. Jesus is Yahweh according to them, according to like really hardcore conservative. And so in order for us to really understand this, how can Jesus be Yahweh? And so when when Israel wrestled with God or divine figure, as described in the Old Testament, the Torah, and so is Israel really fighting Jesus, or is he fighting God? And Christians, like really fundamentalist Christians, they believe that Jesus was the one who revealed the Torah at Mount Sinai to Moses, and that the Israelites hear Jesus spoke, because according to them Jesus is God. And so by this time Jesus doesn't exist yet, and they use the word Yahweh, but according to them Yahweh is Jesus. And so Jesus had already exists, the Son had already exists. Now, this is also a terrible theological example, and the early writings of the Church Fathers refute this very notion as well. One example is because that one actually falls into Arianism, because Arians believe that Jesus doesn't have a soul, and that Jesus, even though they believe that Jesus exists at the inception, okay, in Mary's womb, but there is an earlier form of Christianity, of Christology, called Gnosticism, okay, Docetism. Okay, Docetism is the Christology whereby Jesus never suffered, okay, meaning he doesn't feel any pain. And so if we were to use the example that Jesus is Yahweh, and that Yahweh had already existed in the past, that means Jesus had also existed in the past. And so when Jesus or Yahweh reveals himself to Moses, then what about the inception of the Son? What are we going to say that? Because the words of the Church Fathers is very profound, and they counter this very notion that Jesus had already existed from the past. The Son had already existed from the past, because the Son is Yahweh, Yahweh is the Son. Most profound words from the Church Fathers ever. How can you say that the existence of someone comes later after his origination? Like, how can someone exist after he originate? Get what I mean? The time that someone exists is the time that he originated. And so this is a very profound statement. So how can Christians, like those very fundamental Christians, say that the Son had already existed because the Son revealed, or God revealed, but technically it's the same thing, because according to them Yahweh is Jesus, right, if we go by their narrative. And so Yahweh, or Jesus, had already exists. He's the one who revealed the law to Moses in Mount Sinai. That means he is already here. He is already here. He wrestled with Israel, this divine figure. He wrestled with Israel, with Jacob. Then later on, after he won in Genesis, then he became known as Israel. The one wrestled with God and win. And so that means the Son is really here on earth. And in the book of of Exodus, we find that God walked and Moses covered his head, he covered his face, and he saw the back of God. That means he saw the sun. The sun had already existed. And so this is why the early church fathers have a lot of problems with people who say that Jesus had already existed and that Jesus is Yahweh. Because it doesn't make sense, like Stephen say, how can I be born twice? Or Thomas say, right? Thomas, I believe, in Gospel of John, how can he be born twice? And things like that, because he misunderstood this. Even though this has nothing to do with this point that I'm saying, but what he said is profound. Even though he misunderstood completely what Jesus said in John. But anyway, let's return to the point. And so if Moses saw the back of God, which is Yahweh, which is also the Son, because according to Christian theology, it is the Son who is on earth. The Father is not on earth, but the Father and the Son is the same thing. And so it's a bit confusing here. And so Moses already saw the Son, and so that means the Son must have gone back to the Father, and then then Mary gave birth to the Son again. But this is nowhere found in the writings of the Church Fathers, and this is nowhere found in the entire Christian corpus, the Old and the New Testament. And so this is another problem here, if we were to say that Jesus is Yahweh. Now, the Jews, since the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament belongs to the Jews, the Jews do not interpret that Jesus is Yahweh. And Christians will say that because the Jews do not believe in Jesus. But that is not the Jewish argument. The Jewish argument is on the text itself, not on the belief about Jesus. No, the text itself. The Shema is very profound, that there is only one God. And so the Jews have always believed that there is only one God, and that there is no 2-in-1 or 3-in-1, there is no Trinity, and Yahweh is alone. There is no other God besides me. The Torah is very clear. And the Jews do not believe. And the Jews were the custodian of the Hebrew Bible until Christian Trinitarian views reinterpreted what the Old Testament really is, or the Hebrew Bible really is. And so if we want to understand a text, we should read the text from the people who are the custodian of the text. And any Jewish scholar and Jewish rabbi will agree with me that Yahweh is alone. He is not manifested in many different beings. Even though the word manifested, I don't like the word manifested, because that is not representative of what the Trinity really is. But because of the lack of vocabulary, Yahweh is not manifested in 3 other beings. He doesn't share his essence with 3 other beings, even though this is not the Trinity. You get what I mean? The Trinity is that there is no one person sharing 3 essence, or sharing his essence to 3 different persons, or 3 different beings. That is not the Trinity. It is basically these 3 beings, or these 3 persons, they have the same essence. It's a different thing. One essence, one person sharing, or 3 persons sharing the same essence from one of these beings. That is not the Trinity. The Trinity is, in a nutshell, 3 persons or 3 beings, co-equal, co-substantial, have existed from eternal past, forever in existence. They're homoousios, meaning they're not separated, yet they're 3 persons. But there is not 3 gods, but one God. That is the Trinity. if you look at the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed in 381. Enough of this theological discussion. Let's move on to the return back to the New Testament. The New Testament is made of several different parts. We have the Gospel, the first 4 books of the New Testament, and then we have like the first Christian history, which is the book of Acts of the Apostle, and then we have 13 letters of Paul, and then we have the book of Hebrews, James, Jude, 1st and 2nd Peter, and then we have the book of Revelation. I don't think I've missed out any book here. And so a lot of scholars believe that the writings of Paul, especially 1 Thessalonians, were actually the very first book to have been written that we have in the New Testament. Paul wrote other letters that simply have not survived or have not been chronicled into the New Testament, or have not been selected to be part of the 27 books in the Canon of the New Testament. Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians, and then he probably wrote Galatians, Corinthians, Philippians and Philemons, and last was Romans. And so Paul wrote 7 authentic letters, undisputed letters, that a lot of scholars agree that these were authentically written by Paul. The other 3 disputed letters are 2 Thessalonians. There are 2 Thessalonians, Colossians and Ephesians. And the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy and Titus, the Timothy and Titus caucus, they're pretty much not written by Paul, and this is agreed by a lot of critical scholars. Critical scholars also say that the book of Hebrews is not written by Paul, though conservative views believe so, that the book of Hebrews was actually written by Paul. And a lot of critical scholars reject that Jude wrote Jude, James wrote James, Peter wrote Peter, and John, the son of Zebedee, wrote Revelation, okay, or the Apocalypse. And so we only have only one person that we know wrote the book of the New Testament, and he is Paul. The others, the Gospels, were written anonymously. The title of the Gospels were given probably by Irenaeus of Lyon, because Justin Martyr, when he wrote, when he mentions about, when he narrates, when he quotes the Gospel, he doesn't call it Gospel of Matthew, John, Mark, and Luke. And so the names were only given later on, towards the end of the 2nd century, around the year 185. Irenaeus of Lyon died around 202 or 208. And so Irenaeus of Lyon were responsible for giving the titles that the Gospel we have today. Critical scholars reject, even though Eusebius of Caesarea mentioned that there's a strict tradition, or that this is the tradition, things like that. But there is no evidence, and the evidence is actually against this, because if it is a strict tradition, then why wasn't the early writers before Irenaeus of Lyon, when they were quoting the Gospel, why didn't they even mention that this is from Matthew or from Mark? None of the early writings of the patristic mentions, oh, this is Mark or Luke. Okay, yeah, it's only later. And so we do have a lot of evidence, or the evidence seems to lead in the way whereby the early the gospel, so only given its title later on, towards the end of the 2nd century. Now, I will speak about the canon of the New Testament. Why did early Christians decided to compile 27 different books? There are many reasons, and there are many ways that we can approach this. I'll just give you one approach, and the rest you can read by Metzger and F.F. Bruce. All these other writings, J.N.D. Kelly, have all mentioned about this. John Barton, you can find it in their books. But the most simple and easy to understand was that because Marcion of Sinope from Asia Minor, he had basically produced his own gospel, his own quote-unquote testament, whereby he rejected the Old Testament, the Septuagint, okay, at this time, and he had the book of Luke as well as the epistles of Paul, and this to him is deemed scripture, or at least deemed authoritative writings. And so the early patristic fathers, because they declare Marcion a heretic, and so there is a need for them to actually produce their own testament, which later on became the New Testament. And so Marcion wasn't the only one. We have people who came up with a lot of different beliefs and different places, like in Rome and in Alexandria and in Ephesus. They were all reading different books. They were not reading all 4 Gospels. They were reading a lot of the other Gospels that is now in the apocryphal books. And so as the church gained control, they wanted to control what the people read. And so Athanasius and Epiphanius of Salamis, they were very, very strong bishops, and so they're pretty much the authority that a lot of people don't like Athanasius, by the way. If you read what people wrote about him, you'll be shocked. A lot of people don't like Athanasius. He was a tyrant ruler, according to Hansen, and so a lot of people don't like Athanasius, especially the Neo-Arians, and not Arius, but Arians, because Arius had a dispute with Athanasius' teacher or bishop, Alexander of Alexandria, and Athanasius was a very young man during this time. He was ordained priest around the age of 32 or 30, around there. But he wrote his very first theological treatise much later, around his 40s. And so Athanasius doesn't have a lot to do with the early Arian, with the early conflicts with Arius, things like that. But for all we know, Athanasius was exiled at least 3 times. By Constantine and then by Constantius. But eventually he gained a lot of followers. He was a very strong bishop in Alexandria, a very strong bishop. He had a lot of followers. And Constantius, he was able to get away by not obeying what Constantius had ordered him to do. But anyway, this is beside the point. This is church history. So the canon. And so we have the bishops basically say that, okay, we should follow Marcion in order to counter him, and we should come up with our own 27 books. And so how are we going to do this? Or we should go by what are the books that people read. Okay, Mark is famously read. Okay, we'll take Mark. John, famously read. Luke and Matthew, especially Matthew. Matthew was a very, very, very popular gospel, the most popular gospel. That's why, according to a lot of scholars, it is actually first in the New Testament. and also because it leads a nice transition. It has a nice transition because Matthew is the most Jewish gospel, and so the Old Testament is very Jewish, and so it is a nice segue to the New Testament. So that is why Matthew was actually first. But the canon wasn't fixed per se. People in different churches were still reordering their books. Some put John first, some had Luke first, even though Luke is not popular. Some have Mark first, but Matthew is the most famous gospel, and so a lot of people have Matthew first, even though we should be very careful here, because different scholar produces different data, and things like that. So that is pretty much the canon. Towards the end of the 4th century, the canon is pretty much fixed in its early stages. Okay, in the quote-unquote authoritative stage, or the authoritative sees, for example. But we do know that people were still producing their own canons. They were still rearranging their own works, all the way towards the 10th, 11th, 12th century. Now we'll talk about the text of the New Testament. The manuscripts tradition, the text. Maybe I'll not speak about the manuscripts tradition because it's a bit complicated. I'll just give you a brief overview about the text. I'll just say the manuscripts, what we have, because it's easy for me to explain. To give example, it will help my point here. We have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts. The New Testament were written in Greek. That is the original language. There's a lot of hypotheses that it is actually written in Syriac, in Aramaic, but P52 was written in Greek, and so that is the earliest that we have. Credit card size fragment, the Ace of Spades, and written in both front and back, and so this is very important. So we know that Christians were actually writing in a book, not in a scroll. Because if it's a scroll, then it will not be written front and back. And so the term books here that we have in the Jewish era, even Jews, early Jews like rabbinic Jews, rabbinic Judaism, they were still writing in scrolls, but it is the Christian, the monks, the scribes, who invented books, as in codices that we have, and so that they can easily flip the pages, and it is easy for them to do their missionary works, because we do have evidence that Christians and Jews were engaging with one another, and one hypothesis is that is why it led to the Talmud being produced, because the Septuagint, which is what majority of Jews were reading, including Paul and the early church fathers, because of the polemic that's happening in Christendom, the Jews, somewhere in the north of what we call today Jordan, Palestine, Israel, we don't really know, because the Council of Jamnia has been proven to be a myth. Okay, it is false. So wherever they could have produced this work, but Christians were interpreting the Hebrew Bible, which is the Jewish scripture, according to their own theological framework. And so the Jews need to affirm what their Torah really means, and what was the teachings of their Torah. And so that is one hypothesis as to why the Mishnah, Talmud were actually produced. That is just one of the hypotheses. The other hypothesis, well, maybe I'll not get into the other hypothesis because this is not about Judaism. So anyway, we have 5,800 Greek manuscripts, but majority of the manuscripts that we have came from the 8th and 9th century. The earliest manuscripts of patristic writings, probably around the 5th and 6th century. And so the early patristic manuscripts that we have is about a few centuries after they were actually written. So the New Testament Greek manuscripts, we have 5,800 of them at the moment, and about 20,000 over if we include in Latin, in Syriac, in Coptic, in Armenian, in the language of the Goth, what is that language? Gothic. And so we have over 20,000 manuscripts, and we have a lot of manuscripts that's about of the New Testament. Okay? Then we have about any other ancient literature, including the Quran. We have more manuscripts of the New Testament than we have of the Quran, of Plato, or of Aristotle, of Ibn Khaldun, of Origen, of Pliny, of Tacitus, you name it. We have a lot of manuscripts, but majority of them came from the 8th and 9th century onwards. And we are able to know this because the early writings were written in block, and there were no separation between the words. And so later writings were written in minuscule letters because they're written in small alphabets, which was invented around the 6th and 5th, 6th century, around there. And so the early manuscripts, especially of the first, we don't have any first century manuscripts, zero. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century manuscripts, they were written in block letters. There's no separation between them. And one great example to see this is Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. We call them Codex Aleph and B. And so now, like I said before, we have a lot of manuscripts, 20,000 manuscripts in many different languages. Does this mean that the New Testament is well attested and that we have, for sure, we have the original New Testament now? The truth is, even if we have 1 million manuscripts, it doesn't really matter. And this is often what conservative textual critics have failed miserably to tell their audience for some other reason. And this is something that I feel important to clarify, and Metzger, Ehrman, Parker, Dale Martin as well clarified in their writings and in their lectures, is that it doesn't matter even if we have 1 million manuscripts, because we do not have any manuscripts from the 1st century. And the earlier we go, the more mistakes we have in our New Testament manuscripts, in the autographs, in the witnesses. And the complete New Testament that we have came from Vaticanus Sinaiticus. And the datings differ probably around 350. Some people say that this is the codex that Constantine commissioned Eusebius of Caesarea to do. Sinaiticus, it could be Vaticanus, but no one knows for sure. Because Constantine, according to Eusebius, in his writing, commissioned about 50 codex or canon. And by the way, Sinaiticus contains a book that is not included in today's New Testament. I'll let you find out what that book is. So anyway, the early writings that we have contains a lot of discrepancies. The church fathers were quoting something else, and then the manuscripts were saying something else. And so it is the job of textual critics to actually determine what could have been the original. But there is no way for them to know because we do not have the original. And so they do have to make educated guesses. Okay? Educated guesses. And so it is the textual critics themselves who determine what the New Testament should look like. Okay? And a lot of people do not read the New Testament in Greek, or at least attempt to read in Greek. And they go by like NRSV, NIV, ESV, but they do not really go to UBS and NA28 edition. Or they do not read Metzger's commentary on the Greek New Testament, whereby in certain passages we do have a list, okay, a list of other readings, okay, that the committee disagree with one another, and some of them have the opinion that this is the original reading or the best attested to reading, and the others believe that this is the best attested to reading. And so there's a disagreement even amongst the committee itself. And so this knowledge has not been exposed or has not reached the majority of the Christian today. And so majority of the Christians on the street are not aware of these variant readings, and that these textual scholars themselves, they were the one who actually determined what the Word of God actually is. And in some cases, they actually goes against what the early patristics were actually quoting, because these textual critics believe that the patristics were misquoting stuff, or that they probably had in front of them manuscripts that have itself been changed by scribes. I could give example, but I've given examples in my other videos. You can watch my Going Through the Orthodox Corruption of Scripture book, as well as my videos on going through the text of the New Testament by Metzger. I dedicate about an hour to discuss this very topic that I've discussed just then. So before I draw this to a close, ladies and gentlemen, it is very important that we study the New Testament textual criticism. No doubt this is a very difficult field to study, very boring field to venture upon, but it is very important because this is knowledge that are not widely available, are not widely taught. It is not difficult to learn to read Greek. It is not difficult to learn to read the early Greek manuscripts produced. It is not as difficult as trying to read the Hijazi script of the Quran. It is actually very difficult to read the early Quranic manuscripts compared to reading the early Greek manuscripts, because they're written in bold letters and they're very easy. The form doesn't change as to when we have minuscule letters later on. The form doesn't change, and so it is pretty much easy, I would say, than to read minuscule words or letters. Again, I have not even touched about the history of Christianity, the different schism, the Donatist controversy, Arianism, Quartodeciman controversy, Gnosticism, this Christology. There's so much to go through or to speak about. But I think I've pretty much given you the basic introduction to what Christianity really is. I've given you the theology, I've given you different groups of Christianity, even though I focus more on Protestantism because that is my field of approach. But no doubt, even if you start exploring the literatures of the Greek, of the Eastern Orthodox, I don't know why I kept calling Greek, and the Roman Catholic. Okay, before I end, I'll just present you why. Why was there a split? Now, there are many reasons why there are a split between the East and the Western Church. But pretty much the main reason for the split is because the Western Church believed that the Holy Spirit originated, okay, quote unquote, originated from the Son. Okay, meaning the East disagree with this because this would make the Spirit double subordinate. Okay, and so they believe that the Spirit was originated from the Father and not the Son. In a nutshell, this is a theological split. We can talk about its political split, but there's so much to talk about the political split. But anyway, I do not want to make this video too long. My name is Arfat, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.